That's okay. Thank you for this really spectacular turnout. I really appreciate it. My name is Dana Levin. I'm a board member of St. Louis Poetry Center, and since 2020, I have been curating, first with my pal Jen Tampeden, and then by myself, the Observable reading series. And this is my last stint. I'm going to step away, and the amazing Lizzie Peterson is going to step in for the spring. So I'm here to host two last readings, and tonight's reading features poets Matt Donovan and Elizabeth Hoover. And before I say some things about them, I want to thank the Missouri Arts Council, the Regional Arts Commission, the Kranzberg Foundation for letting us inhabit this fabulous space, Hilo. And I also want to tell you, some of you have started to attend the Sunday writing workshops. And the next one is going to be on October 22nd, Sunday, with Tommy Archuleta, who is a really great poet from New Mexico, and actually a former student of Matt and mine. And Tommy is going to read on October 23rd, Monday, with Ariana Benson, who is a student at WashU and whose first book just won the Kamehameha Prize. It's called Black Pastoral. So if you want to write with the community, please look for the deadline for work submission for the October 22nd Sunday workshop. And please come back here on October 23rd, Monday, 7 p.m. to hear Tommy Archuleta read with Ariana Benson. I'm really happy to be hosting Elizabeth and Matt here. Matt is one of my oldest friends. I've known Matt for 25 years. We were colleagues together at College of Santa Fe when I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I think he's a spectacular writer and just an all-around good egg. And Elizabeth is a new neighbor, a new faculty member at Webster University. And I'm so glad that Elizabeth is here to join the poetry community and has some pretty interesting projects up their sleeve. Elizabeth's going to read first, and then Matt. And so I'm going to be very brief. I'm just going to tell you about Elizabeth Hoover. Elizabeth Hoover is the author of The Archive is All in the Present Tense. You should buy this book, get it signed. Winner of the 2021 Barrow Street Book Prize. Her creative nonfiction has appeared in the North American Review, Kenyon Review, and Story Quarterly. Elizabeth teaches in the English department at Webster University in St. Louis. We are so glad to have Elizabeth here tonight. Please welcome Elizabeth to the podium.
This is going to be a challenge, Matt. Hi. How's everyone doing?
We're here. We're with you.
I don't know if I can read. We'll see how it goes. So I want to thank Dana so much for inviting me to be a part of this. Is this a good?
You could probably see it. You want me to read it up?
Oh, I think it's okay. Can you hear? Can everyone hear me? Thank you, though. Okay, sorry. Let me get oriented. So I want to thank Dana so much for inviting me to participate. When I moved to St. Louis, I found out about the Poetry Center, and I started going to their events. I love going to the workshops, and I was so surprised when Erin took me upstairs to show me the offices, because I was expecting something like slightly smaller than the Poetry Foundation at Chicago, but still, like, the programming is incredibly substantial. So y'all punch way over your weight. And it's really amazing what they do in schools and in the community. And so I think we should give Erin Quick, who is, I believe, the only full-time employee, a round of applause. Woo! Tonight, I'm going to be reading from The Archive is All in Present Tense, which is a book that follows a researcher in a fantastical, limitless archive. And one of the things that's really fun for me is there are lots of different threads, and so every time I read, I get to pick a new thread. And I think I'm going to focus on clothing. I'm preparing to give a conference talk on the significance of clothing for queer writers. So this will be my preparation for that. Sometimes the archive is a spring snow. Sometimes the archive is opaque as an oracle. Sometimes it plays as easy as a music box. Sometimes it's a dentist chair and a long Novocaine needle. Sometimes it freezes over and I watch librarians labor under ice. Sometimes the archive is a museum of Fabergé eggs and ingenious watches. Sometimes it doesn't exist, and the archivist and I sit in the wheat dreaming up history. Sometimes it's the prescience of the riot. Sometimes a wall of windows overlooking a Permian swamp. Today the archive is an aquarium. Bass glide in and out of the stacks. Catfish carry paper in their whiskers. Eels swarm at the catalog's open drawers. A librarian in a bathysphere leads a trout to my table. The trout looks like an ancient mechanism dragged from the sledge with a sorrowful mouth and bristled tongue, extravagantly speckled and pink on its underside. When I slide my page slip free of her gills, I see the velvet red of her breathing apparatus. Bubbles spill, jaw grinds open, and her mouth gapes as if she's answering every question I came here with, or drowning on a dock after a girl yanked her from the pond, wanting to see what would happen if she counted to 100 before tossing her back. I'm going to read a poem called The Archive Husband's Time, and it mentions the FSA. And the FSA was a Depression-era program. It's Farm Security Administration. And actually, Dorothea Lange, the famous photographer, took photographs for them. So during the Depression, as part of the New Deal, like, the government would pay writers to interview people and make oral histories and pay artists to take photographs of them. And I think it's so incredible to think, like, what would happen in this moment if we, like, proposed to the government that they should pay writers to go out and learn about the people who live in this country. I don't think they would agree, but anyways, that's what the FSA is. And at the time of this writing, they had not yet discovered that some of the FSA photographs, including the ones taken by Dorothea Lange, are in color. I just said that like it was so delightful, and I can't tell if it's people are like, okay. The archive husband's time. Today, the archive is the empty chambers of the dead Nautilus, boiled clean. Pages whisper like lovers in a language I can't identify. Crows tell all they witness. I transcribe their cackles, telegram orthologist, study cuneiform fractures in a hunger weakened bone, cataloged under inscriptions, osteology, bride. Double check introduction to Sumerian grammar, but my translation keeps reading, a boyfriend like you, no one was ever nice to me, but I can't tell any. Swaying by the reshelving station, librarians fold used call slips into fortune tellers, pointing at their chosen flaps. I gather my notes, collect my bag from the hallway locker. In the parking lot, an archivist makes a show of looking for their keys. I try a friendly hello, but it's laced with defeat. Consider time, they say, like a typewriter. Out here, one thing happens after another, causal or not, anywhere along that spectrum. Their cheeks sparkle under circular glasses as if they've swiped graphite on for blush. Out here, as if they swiped graphite on for blush. In the archive, time submits to the catalog. Out here, they motion like bailing up wire. Time is master. I step closer to examine their bow tie. Whirring Kodachrome, reel-to-reel tape. They lean back, light in their spectators. Good luck, they type into the wind and duck into their car, leaving me in a blank landscape, timeless as an FSA photograph. I need to work on my interstitial banter. In the archive of possible utterances. I know it's time. I have to ask the archivist about my grandfather laughing. My commanders liked me so much they kept me from all that. Women huddled on the mountain, concertina wire re-spooled after the camp was cleared. Instead, I offer the verso of a note I never answered from a girl I met at a gas station who wanted someone to be nice to her and only knew the word boyfriend to ask for it. I offer the gravel driveway her brother dragged us down. My silence is the screwdriver I use to open the front of the archivist's throat, revealing a mouthpiece from a portable radio transmitter. When I press my mouth against it, I kiss my own ghosts and the echoes of all we never became. Oh, thank you. Snaps. This. Thank you. Sorry, sometimes I can't help but laugh at myself. This poem is called "Sometimes the Archive Sculpts Vermin from Marble." There's another thread that I didn't really address where the researcher is trying to track down information on public executions, so that might appear in here. I mean, that does appear in here. I know it does. Okay. Sometimes the archive sculpts vermin from marble. A librarian capsizes on my table, drunk on the dust of wine, accordion wheezing like a raccoon scissored in a trap, papers scatter, music sours as they fall out of time. What are we celebrating? I ask another librarian at the front desk, picnic basket poised on their knees. They remind me to note my seat number on the page slip, though, as always, I'm the only one here. They bring me my box. I notice their palms are stained gray. Remember the executions I paged earlier. People came from all over to watch. Each hanging a festival, every electrocution, a party. The boys' book of adventure, embossed on the book's green leather cover. I finger the gold edges of its pages, then open to engravings of two grubby tomboys, clamoring over rocks. My sister cups a crawdaddy, knee skinned raw. On the next page we are playing war. I wear my grandfather's helmet, brandish a stick for a gun. I can't bring myself to turn the page, imagining the dresses and distance that came with puberty. In the parking lot, I look for the archivist, wanting to commiserate on the silliness of history. It's empty, except for a possum lumbering across the asphalt, dragging its naked tail. Hey, I call, what does it all add up to? The possum freezes and flips over, fleshy feet stretched to the sky, toothy mouth agape. I tow around the stiff form and get into my car, crank the heat, stretch my palms to the vents. My hands speckled with guilt from the book. With each opening, it must slough off some of its luster. Oh, thank you. except when it's very hot in archives. They only have 2 temperatures. This is called the Archive Maestro's History. You can't go in like that. The archivist teletype hooks me in the parking lot. They hand me a suit bag, turn as I unzip. Net of tulle, the dress strains against my shoulders. I smell the licorice my grandfather chewed to quit tobacco. Shudder shushing as I stepped into the cream Buick. The archivist in a tux and tails, pinstriped with sprocket holes, slides a putrid corsage on my wrist, gathers my elbow. The lobby is packed with gowns and jackets, swollen by the absence of their owners. Hatpins, stays, and cravats stream past as I tug at my clinging hem and find a satin stripe, a pocket my hand easily slips into. The archivist plucks cufflinks from the air, fastens my sleeves, and straightens my bow tie. They vanish with a curtsy into the tremble of velvet draping the catalog. A pillbox hat hands me a program that reads, "Nice to me, but I can't tell any of my friends about you, how it feels to, the paper disintegrates as instruments lift at the urging of an unseen baton." So I did get kicked out of prom for wearing a tuxedo. And I don't regret wearing a tuxedo. I do regret wearing that tuxedo. I got it at a Goodwill. It was not my size, and I did not tailor it. So what happens is that they go in, and the archive has changed into a theater, and they're attending a performance, and the audience is made up of pieces of clothing from the clothing collection. There's actually a really interesting clothing collection at the State Historical Society in Forest Park, if you want to see a clothing collection. And so this is intermission. We rise and uncreak the creases. We rise, applause, dislodging dust from doveskin. We rise and go, silk and tulle, whalebone and waistcoat, pleat and pearl. We rise in chemises and shifts, stockings and redingots, chintz and taffeta, and go. We gather in clutches of sleeves and slacks, cabals of houndstooth and hoop skirts, bundles of buckles and stomachers. We spill speeches, lines, mummifying wine from goblets and glasses, mugs and steins. It stains the lobby floor like a bruise, roping the wrist. We are the bones that held the skin, that lifted the bodices, that blushed beneath fichu, that cooed black Alison lace, that fingered the piping, that pressed its corset against another's corsage. We are the memory of those bones, linen pinched at the knee, trumpet sleeves gaping at the elbow, the empty cast trailing tendrils of cotton. We are the recollection of ligament, the ball of muscle at the base of the tongue. We are the Latin of its name. We are a tide bundled against the shore, bundled against the door, straining to get out into air, into what will make us decay, the only way we know to join the living. We brush against leaving, cradle what remains. We are hermetic and hermeneutic, dry as a cat's breath, and we miss the oil of our owners, their skin and its secretions. We miss the little girl's spit as she chews our ribbon in church, blood speckling a gym uniform, sweat from the orphan's palms as she smooths and smooths her skirt on her first plane ride, slender wrist crossed in her lap, all the way to America. We powder at the touch, wrought on contact, yellow in light. We want our seams to tear with a fumble, a child to grow out of us, a gate to make a side split, frugality to transform us into quilt or rag. We talk with our collars, confound with our stitching, tattle with our smell. We are echoes of flesh and partners of presence. We are attendants, waiting on you, wanting to be born again. That one's not easy to read. I did a bad job of timing this. Oh, Matt, you're gonna get to go on early. Okay, sorry. This is called Of What Is Not Written, the Archive Only Dreams. And we were actually at dinner, Matt, Donovan, and Ted, I don't know your last name, I'm sorry, who's also a poet. We were talking about growing up in the Midwest, and I'm from Pittsburgh, and they're from Cleveland, and I never participated in the rivalry. I thought it was fine that there could be two cities close to one another, but I don't know why I'm telling you that. I found two AAA batteries up here. Okay, sorry. I'm an archivist, so I have to tell you everything. And so this poem mentions a junkie's darkroom, and that's the photographer W. Eugene Smith. And he took photographs of Pittsburgh for Time magazine that was called the Pittsburgh Project. He's also famous for taking photographs that actually he took photographs to show the effect of chemical factories in rural Japan on local populations. And he ended up dying from injuries he sustained being beaten by security guards at a factory, which you don't need to know for this poem. But he was addicted to heroin, and he made beautiful photographs. And so that's what that is. Yeah, I think that's all. Okay, this is called Of What Is Not Written, the Archive Only Dreams. When the archive dreams of Pittsburgh, smoke pours from the stacks, and librarians don goggles, wrap the books in tarp. When the archive dreams of Pittsburgh, I perch on an overhead crane and watch as a silhouette emerges from a row of hook blocks, shimmying with a pull to flip open the furnace. Molten spreads along the paper under the red light of a junkie's darkroom. I stumble into the parking lot where the archivist kneels, easing gas masks off goldfinches. They lean back on their heels, unhook their collar, already blackened, lift a fresh one from a nearby briefcase. We are high up in an office at Gulf Oil, unwrapping a roast beef sandwich. Meanwhile, the archive dreams of a woman taking off her apron, sitting in the quiet, her coffee speckled with the 3 drops of cream she allows herself. I want to sit next to her, but even the archivist magic only takes us to the lip of the unrecorded. Once I fell in love with a woman who'd been a thief. She kept her juvenile release papers in a box with dried out, wet, and wild makeup to remind us how little we have to take from them. She touched me like a lockpick, like she was listening for tumblers to click into place. She touched me as if I wasn't already a gate hanging from broken hinges. In the parking lot, I finger ruffles edged in gold on the porcelain doll the archivist slipped into my pocket before the librarians joined us. I remember finding one just like this. Or is it the same one amidst scarves and perfume bottles in my grandfather's attic? An elegant dream of summer blushing under parasols along an American river. A reminder a woman lived in this house, made it possible for us to forget her. I remember why I brought up the Cleveland thing. So I don't know if you had family who had to do this, but men's shirts have these detachable collars. And my grandfather would take the streetcar to work, and he would have to change his collar when he got to work because of the smog in the air. Okay, this is called The Archive Tells You You Are in the Wrong War.
Gatsby wore white with Daisy to display his purity. The red D stares up at me from my sister's paper on the Great Gatsby. I rifle through my notes. I thought I'd page military records, Western Pennsylvania, minor conflicts. Come on, my sister begs, please help me. I need at least a B to graduate. She kneels outside the bathroom door, hands steepled in prayer, as I apply Band-Aids to my bleeding heels. I'm sorry I told Grandpa about your outfit. The taxidermy collection's mannequins model Junior Miss fashions. And our next door neighbor tells me I just haven't found the right fit. I am trussed with measuring tape, and the card catalog spills lace, all those tiny bows at the center of everything. I will help you walk in the shoes, my sister bargains. They will break in, I promise. 2 cocktails in at my grandfather's wake, she wraps me in her arms. I'm just so glad, she drools into my suit coat. You seem happy, finally, now you're, yourself. Once, the only God I had was my sister. And like every God, she turned away. Now the archive is a giant lung, wheezing with the breath of unsaid things. I study men, their acts of war, their books on civilization, their achievements. They bind their records in leather, paint the pages with guilt. They invented the system I used to find them, and yet my page slips keep turning up girls' diaries, mixtapes from carpools, our voices shouting, love you like a sister always. The flyer from the concert we snuck into with fake IDs, and the note I never replied to. I'm frightened of what they will do to us if. So I'm gonna end with this. I wanna thank everybody in the dark. You could have all left, I don't know. That's what I'm pretending. No, not because I don't want you to be here, I'm sorry. This is why I can't do banter, I should just read directly from the script. But because I get nervous, maybe I should just even not end. So this is called, and in the end, the archive keeps its own counsel. I'm sorry, and thank you. And okay, and in the end, the archive keeps its own counsel. Don't worry, it's a short one. I came to the archive looking for blame, to cut through like a furrow, and instead I am received, unbound and mended. Laying on the archivist's table, where they measure my ear, the circumference of its shadow. Like paper, skin absorbs all, each tap of the service bell, every knuckle crushed into a fist, all the milkweed rolled between palms, silk unspooling. The archivist sweeps a cloth through the gully of my collarbone, thumbs my spine looking for give where it needs repair. They fold muslin under my neck, bolster tender joints, and tip open my jaw, lift my tongue to read the utterances lodged in my throat. For my entry, they weave my present into a description using a logic I can only submit to, as we float in the archive's tank of dreams, bodies stitched together with a dash. Thank you so much.
That was great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, and you know, your work and Matt's work have really talked to each other. I like when that happens, when you pair people together and you kind of don't know why, and then you're like, oh, there's a conversation going on here. Matt Donovan, my friend, going back 25 years, thank you for being here, Matt, is the author, most recently, of The Dug Up Gun Museum from Boa Editions and Missing Department, a collection of art and poetry made in collaboration with the artist Leisure Bowden. He is the recipient of a Whiting Award, a Rome Prize in Literature, Pushcart Prize, the Levis Reading Prize, and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Literature. Donovan serves as director of the Boutel Day Poetry Center at Smith College. He brings poets to the students at Smith. He loves poetry. I love Matt. Please welcome Matt Donovan.
You didn't tell me it was so bright.
It's hard.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I have had such an amazing trip to St. Louis. I've had such, I mean, the weather's been gorgeous, and it's been about 5 years since I've been here. I've loved just being in the city. I'm incredibly thrilled to be a part of this reading series, and especially since 2020, it feels not at all like a small thing to come together as a community and listen to poems together in person. So it's just not something I take for granted anymore. And that goes for, I did a workshop. Some of you out there in the darkness were in the workshop on Sunday, which was, it was such a great group. It was such a thrill to talk poems together. And I felt like folks did the best possible thing in a workshop situation, which was to really engage with the pieces on their own terms. So it was just, that was a lovely experience too. I am incredibly grateful to Dana for inviting me, and for Aaron. It's been wonderful to meet you, and all the logistical work you've been doing. And then, yeah, it's fabulous to read with Elizabeth and to have met you. I mean, this also is just one of the thrills about traveling and doing readings when they pair you with someone. It's just really exhilarating to hear your work. And even when the poet is from Pittsburgh, it can be a great experience. So thank you all for coming tonight. Is this okay? Like this distance?
Yeah.
I'm going to read most of the poems from this book, The Dug Up Gun Museum, which it started as a nonfiction project. I mean, probably like many of us here, I just was, motivated by fear and rage and grief, wanting to somehow find a way to respond to guns and gun violence in our country. And I wanted to also not do it from behind my desk. I really wanted to go out and talk to people. So I started traveling the country. I wanted to talk to gun owners. I wanted to talk to people in communities that have been really affected by gun violence. And so I found myself in places like Sandy Hook and cities like Cleveland and Chicago. And then also in just like utterly bizarre situations too, like a D-Day reenactment with paintball in Pennsylvania, and just wanted to ask questions and I wanted to engage. So I will read a couple of poems from there. One of the places that I just mentioned that I traveled was Chicago, and I met a really wonderful visual artist there who does sculpture, Garland Martin Taylor. And he also had a similar idea where he was really concerned about gun violence that had directly affected his community, and he had made a sculpture that was responding to it, and then he didn't want to preach to the choir, so he moved the sculpture around the country, and so it is described here in addition to a change that he made when it was out there in the world. I didn't expect Emily Dickinson to show up in this poem. I live in Amherst, and when I drop my kids off at school, I pass her house every day, and maybe that's how she weaseled her way in here, if I can use that verb with Emily Dickinson. I don't know, but I totally stole from her in the title of this poem, which spills right into the piece. Here the thing with feathers isn't hope, but a 400-pound pistol in the bed of a pickup, welded together from scrapyard metal and stamped with names of kids shot and killed near the artist's home. Except for all the feathers, dyed cotton candy blue and affixed to the pistol's cylinder and grip, wrapping the length of the barrel with a flourish like a boa entwining a neck. It might seem like any other oversized gun. Conversation piece, he called it, although the feathers came later, only after he'd begun driving south with a plan to haul the sculpture from Chicago to Atlanta, then back through Charleston and Sandy Hook. But when he stopped for gas the first time, he knew his art had failed when a man sprinted across the parking lot to say, "God damn, that's one badass gun." Something needed to change. Maybe feathers could turn the pistol into a thing you approached with a question instead of praise. And if the plumes now covered some of the names, bearing the elegies hammered into metal, what choice did he have but to continue driving through town after town, listening to the wind song whipping across the wide mouth of the barrel, tending to the gun now and then from a sack of feathers he kept in the back seat to use whenever storms lashed things loose. One of the places I spent some time was Cody, Wyoming, which has the highest gun ownership per capita of anywhere in the country. And I am not, just breathe, it says up here on the inside of the podium. So I'm not a journalist, but I wanted to write something journalistic. And so what I would do when I was traveling is I'd show up somewhere and I, because time and money was limited, I needed to ask sort of one question when that would be my focus. But inevitably, I think this is, the tendency of a lot of poets, I would get distracted by other things. Like I went to Cody, Wyoming in 2017, and at the time there was a bill that was being put forward that would allow, at the time it was unique, and now it's much more prevalent, to arm faculty and staff members of the school. So I went there to talk about that. But then, it's things like there's an actual dug up gun museum, like right down the road from where I was staying. And so I would get distracted and I would see, metaphoric possibilities elsewhere. But anyway, this piece, I arrived in Cody to talk about that plan. And this piece recounts a discussion that I had with a school board member who was also a gun shop owner, and he started talking about something else that became the core of this story. Solipsism, a story. Victim mentality, he told me, means sitting with your back to the door anywhere at all. Even, I was learning, while sipping a Red Bull and surrounded by tourists at the Hotel Buffalo Bill named after his daughter. I'd more likely leave my house without my pants than without my gun, he said. So even though we were talking in the Irma's side saloon about plans to arm Cody's teachers, scenario training, lockable holsters, the deterrence of not knowing who's armed, the theme was readiness is all. Pistol in hand when opening his front door. Peering through his gun shop's window before stepping inside. And how whenever he drives to another town, he'll have an AR-15 and extra mags and a quick zip-off on the back seat, a 45 on the hip and ankle gun strapped tight while his girlfriend rides shotgun with a 38 in her purse and a 40 caliber in the back without fail. 5 guns for a drive to Billings. Just in case, you never know. What else could I think? But you have to be shitting me. And I can't wait to tell this tale. Before leaving town, I circled back to his store, wanting to hard grip his hand, see what else he might let slip. As I strolled the rifles and pistols, clips, and cases, gun safes, and gunpowder, waiting for him to finish whatever he was doing with the gun he held, the green eyes of a taxidermy leopard stared at something that was not me. Its dark mouth hinged open enough to show the curved shape someone had chosen for its tongue. Hey, I'm glad you came back. Don't take this the wrong way, but I've been telling folks I met some guy who doesn't own a gun, an unarmed dad, and no one can believe it. We looked at each other for half beat, maybe more, and didn't say what we were thinking about how each of us had chosen to move through the world, or how both of us by then had turned into a story about something impossible, glimpsed somewhere we thought we knew. I haven't spoken to him since. Thank you. I wasn't going to read this piece, but Cleveland did come up a lot over dinner. And it was really gracious of Elizabeth. I think at one point she just admitted that it's a much better city than Pittsburgh, which I thought was really wonderful. Maybe I'm misremembering. Ted Mathis, who I was really pleased to meet tonight, also grew up in that area, and I do love the city of Cleveland. And then during my time there, I also had a moment of realizing and understanding just how little I actually knew about Cleveland. It's been a long time since I've lived there, and it was a strange turn of events. My piano teacher from who I grew up with in Ohio, her son was the lead ballistics detective in Cleveland for many years, and so I spent a day with him. And in that situation, again, when I was writing the nonfiction book, I went there to just try to understand something about how bullets work, and that also just spilled into a whole other complicated vision of what he was contending with there in the city. There is reference to a tank where he would test fire guns, which he had named, and maybe that's all you need to know about this piece. This is a slightly longer one. Poem not ending with blossoms. Think of an oar, the cop said, and I pictured one, raised and dripping above the waves, how it'll slice through water, or if you turn it, it'll slam against the surface instead. The metaphor intended to explain the difference between hollow point and round nose bullets. Although the more I imagined the gripped oar, its dip or clumsy splash, the further I seemed to drift from the work of any gun, yet without ever gliding from here, this once bustling, fluorescent-lit 7th floor space that used to be police headquarters, but had been gutted after a recent move, which left behind only a few detectives to wade through decades of rape kits and FedEx boxes of narcotics in a storehouse maze that ended in what had once been a communal shower, now crowded with trash bags stuffed with heroin and guarded by a display of horror hostess Elvira adorned with a respirator mask. He offered another comparison. It's a choice between an ice pick or hammer passing through your chest. Cued perhaps by the property room we toured upstairs, a place where everything linked to a violent crime was grouped by semblance in untidy heaps. Toasters crowding shelves next to microwaves, laptops stacked near rows of flat-screen TVs, and sledgehammers tossed on a cord-tangled mess of nail guns and drills. There were guns, of course, more than 40,000, piled into filing cabinets, shopping carts, or rain barrels, depending on their size. Over here, he pointed to a mannequin head perched on 6 prosthetic limbs. We're trying to make a full body, but only have one head and these legs. Why, I asked, since it seemed worth asking, are there so many baby swings in here? Sometimes you don't want to know. But because I wanted to know how a bullet works for reasons I can no longer explain, he led me downstairs to Bertha, a test fire tank made from plexiglass, pool liners, and iron beams. The name just suits her. She's sturdy, reliable, and takes bullets all day without complaint. Industrial gray, with a tiny flag tucked between her exhaust fan and switch, Bertha reminded me of something from the off-limits corner of shop class, where instead of building birdhouses, we'd spend our time folding sheets of metal until they became blade-like things we loved to hold, wield, jab, content to wound nothing but air. And how did it feel to test fire thousands of guns each year? Boring, he said. You end up deaf and stuck with a bunch of water too polluted to dump. Then he loaded 2 hollow points, slipped his Glock into Bertha's PVC pipe, called out ears for 2, and fired both rounds. The sound of gunshots was chased by the metallic chime of cartridges dropping to the floor. A slow slosh of water, one screw rolling in half circles across the tank's trapdoor. Call that an American song, and nothing happens, or worse. Although perhaps it's worse to admit that after he netted the metal nubs and placed them into my hand, their split tips curling back in petal-like shapes extending from a center copper speck. Blossom was the word that came to mind. Even if months later I saw some earrings online made from the same kind of bullets, each one flower-shaped and described by the artist as clear-coated and tumbled to a smooth finish, that doesn't change how much I'd wished for a different word to hold in that cramped room as little waves moved, then stopped. It's possible the figurative ran its course here a while back. Do we really need a personified tank and metaphor of an oar smacking the surface of a lake where they pour Bertha's lead-tainted water each week to understand we're paddling nowhere? Once, the cop told me, they received a call about someone bleeding on a bus. They pulled the vehicle over and found a guy using a broken off tree branch to gouge a bullet from his calf. I'm still trying to picture this, still trying to form the image of the man and the branch he held. It was November. Nothing was blooming in Cleveland once again when he told them, hell yes, he'd been shot. A few blocks back, fuck off. Kindly leave him alone, and he'd just get the hell on with his day. Thank you. I'm going to read one short one, and then I have one longer new one that I would like to end with. Sometimes, not all the poems stem from travel. Sometimes I would just be blindsided by something that I discovered online. In this case, it was an article in Self magazine about what to do in a mass shooting, and it just, in terms of how normalized it seemed in that context, I was really horrified by that. And then the template for this poem is this, I don't know if some of you know it, but this really incredible poem by the Polish poet Wisława Szymborska, where it's a poem written in fragments that have to do with acts of survival and the chance and happenstance of survival. And the title of the poem is the title that was there in Self magazine. Mass shootings are actually pretty rare, but here's what to do if you're ever in one. It could happen. Once it happens. Earlier, later, closer today, but not to you. You'll survive because you ran, because you hid, because you were first, because last, because alone, because the others. Of course, highly unlikely. Of course, situationally aware. Be sure the door won't open. Be sure the door won't close. Conceal, barricade, to the left, the right, accept the sound for what it is. If you're lucky, there will be a fence. If you're lucky, the fence has been removed. Perhaps a mug of coffee, door wedge, scissors, the broken leg of a chair, a turn, a shirt, a second, perhaps a ballpoint pen. Thanks to calm, an element of surprise, in spite of, and yet. What would happen if the eyes, the throat, the knees, a step away? So he is here, straight from the moment without end. The net, the gun, but you, the mesh. I can't be silent enough. Listen how quickly your heart is beating and mine. I'm going to end with a piece. It's a slightly longer poem. I hope that's okay. And just two things I want to say about it. This is a new poem. There is definitely reference to gun violence in this poem, but one of the most moving things about having this book out in the world has been people who have shared their stories with me and the generosity of that. And when I was reading in Boston, and someone introduced themselves, and they were there on the anniversary of their son's death, who had been he'd been killed on a college campus many years before. And we subsequently became friends, and we've been corresponding. So part of his story is in this piece, and his generosity and trust with me. And then the other part of this poem, maybe it seems like an odd juxtaposition, but do you all know the amazing poet Gabby Cabo-Caresi? Gabby came to Smith, where I work, and Gabby was trying to figure out what they were going to be giving a talk on. And Gabby said, maybe I could talk about queerness in Mary Oliver poetry. And it's like, yes, Gabby, that is absolutely what you should talk about. And you can watch it online. I recommend it. It's such a heartfelt and beautiful and wonderful discussion about Mary Oliver and Gabby's own connection to it. But Gabby ended up focusing on this poem, Wild Geese, which I hope some of you might know. And it's a poem that for me, until I heard Gabby's talk, or for a long time before I heard Gabby's talk, it's so canonical, and it's been commodified in a lot of ways. And Gabby really cracked it open for me. And there's a moment in there especially about acts of sharing despair. And Gabby really wanted to invite us to think about what that means. And so that becomes one of the occasions for this piece. The title is On Seeing the First Line of Wild Geese on a Tote Bag at Whole Foods. Or at least part of it. But is that what you'd want to know? How I was standing in the checkout with my groceries when I saw the opening words of Mary Oliver's poem, written across a sunset, rendered as a peach-colored square cluttered with wing-flapping geese. You do not have to be, I read, and assumed the word good was tucked out of sight, as it often is, hidden by the folds of a canvas bag being filled with kale, kombucha, and shrimp, all gliding a few feet on a conveyor belt operated by a cashier named Ben. Reader, there have been times when I have wanted to say, fuck those geese, given how they're everywhere, t-shirts, greeting cards, and now this bag, always soaring across the same sky, honking now and forever, calling to us, sure, I suppose, but also doing what geese do. Then again, birds are never to blame for cash grabs. That's just our way of making the world offer itself to the imagination. Maybe it's your desert island poem, in which case, my bad. Or maybe the two of us have shared the thought, please, enough with the goddamn geese. Either way, wild geese will never stop inviting us to exchange feelings of despair. Once I sat across from a man at a cafe, both of us diving into niçoise salads, both of us sipping chilled rosé, as he told me about his son who'd been shot and killed 30 years before. Or rather, he told me about how he was taking time to learn how to shoot a gun in the hope of mastering what had given him the most pain. I listened, then tore off some baguette and didn't know what to offer in return. Oh Lord, Patsy Cline said, as if explaining her voice to God, I sing just like I hurt inside. I hadn't known Patsy Cline would appear in this poem, but here we are just the same. Instead, I'd planned to describe what I felt upon seeing a tub of snickerdoodle hummus begin its short-lived glide toward the wide, peachy spaces between the tote bag's words. All to what end, I didn't know. I'll never know if Patsy Cline planned that last moment in faded love when everything stops. And in that silence between the title's two words, there's a rasp of breath that becomes a sob before the song returns, finding its foothold in the final chord as her voice wavers and dips. Either way, if you care to listen, that song carries the sound of a heart being stomped and someone dropping to their knees. Long ago, after a night of hearing Mary Oliver read her work, I watched her at a reception stroll toward a courtyard, and until I noticed the cigarette in her hand, assumed she'd felt overcome by the urge to stand beneath the endless pinprick of stars. Prayer, she wrote, is paying attention, then patching together some words, meaning you don't have to be in the pine woods hoping deer will nibble from your palm. You could be at Whole Foods or beneath the trembling leaves of an aspen, not really looking at anything at all as slices of almond cake in your honor begin to move around the space inside. And each time you lift a Marlboro to your lips, the intake of breath offers a crimson flare. Reader, you've likely noticed that neither of us has yet given voice to our own desperation, although your silence here is understandable. Instead, I can tell you that as the geese in their crappy sunset left the store, Ben, the cashier, took up that divider thing that announces one's place in line, and as a means of summoning me forward, asked, "What's up?" Arugula, apparently. Olives and dark chocolate I bought on a whim, since that's what the soft animal of my body desired. Meanwhile, the world goes on, as does Mary Oliver's poem, before it concludes with a different invitation, which is merely to listen to the sounds of the earth and, in so many words, ask what it might mean. I don't mean to pilfer a sadness that belongs to someone else, but I need to tell you about the time when the man whose son had been killed stood in the graveyard trying to summon forth a prayer until there was a sound from an oak tree in the neighboring field that was like nothing he had ever heard. It came from a hole about the size of his wrist, a cooing, a gurgling moan. Maybe it was a type of weasel, he thought, or some other animal tucked inside. He was a man alone in a field, hearing sounds pouring forth from the darkness in a hole in a tree, and he didn't know what it meant or what it was or what to do. And he stayed there listening for a long time, all the same. Thank you so much for being here. So Elizabeth said, thank you and I'm sorry, which seems like such a great Midwestern gesture. So thank you and I'm sorry. No.
Friends, thank you for coming. Please give our readers another round of applause. Talk to the authors, talk to each other, buy books, come back on October 23rd to hear Tommy Archuleta and Ariana Benson, and be well.
It's great. So it's not okay. Yeah. Did we read for the perfect?
You did. You were both great. Great. No, you gotta go down. Yeah, I mean, we started at the.
We started. I don't know. That was there was an audacity. I didn't even ask. I'm sorry. I overstepped. Okay, well it's here. Okay, at some point. 4 years. Once we